Hello and welcome everyone to our professional services webinar today. For those that don't know me, my name's Donna Koshek. I am the Professional Services Banking Executive at NAB in Brisbane. I lead the specialised banking team who care for accounting, financial planning, real estate, legal, insurance broking and financial broking customers. I'd like to start today in welcome with an acknowledgement to country. I acknowledge that we are meeting today across the lands of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I join you today from the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people here in Brisbane. I honour the deep connections of First Nations peoples to the places where we all join from. In honour of the International Women's Day, I acknowledge the significance of Aboriginal women in keeping culture awake through being the carriers of story through songlines and law. I acknowledge elders past and present and the sacrifices that have been made in the ongoing work towards equity, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people who join us today. At NAB, we're committed to inspiring inclusion in every aspect of business, and we chose to hold this event around IWD, where so many of our professional services businesses and workforces are made up predominantly of women, but our equity owners continue to be mostly men. This speaks to a possible succession and talent retention opportunity that isn't being optimised in our businesses. Our hope is that this webinar will provide some key insights to help you and your business partners prepare a pathway to equity for your talent, no matter their gender. Today we'll hear from Claire Roberts, Julia Shortinghouse and Kate Graham. They're joining me in an informal panel discussion on the untapped succession planning opportunity for professional services businesses. Firstly, a quick introduction to our panellists. Claire Roberts is the Director at Hoffman Kelly Chartered Accountants here in Brisbane, having joined the firm since 2007. She has a diverse range of clients providing broad advice in the areas of optimal structuring, business performance and improvement, taxation and self-managed superannuation. Hey Claire. Claire's a qualified chartered accountant, and in recent years Claire has been a member of the Professional Development Committee and the Engagement Committee of the Tax Institute. Julia Shortinghouse is a Director of Lighthouse Capital in Perth and has been specialising in the financial industry since 1994. Julia has worked as Vice President with Merrill Lynch Investment Management and has a deep understanding of portfolio construction, asset allocation and portfolio risk management. Julia is a certified financial planner and holds a number of other esteemed accreditations. And to be honest, her CV was quite intimidating. But one thing I think you should all know about Julia is that she's also the host of a community-based Good Money Habits podcast and is passionate about promoting and developing financial literacy tools for the broader community. The formidable Kate Graham is a founder and director of Living Property Management here in Brisbane and has a strong passion for the real estate industry, which began in 2001. Kate's experience has equipped her with valuable insights in the industry. Kate owns and manages a fast-growing and successful property management business, having just acquired her third rent roll, Living Property Management here in Brisbane, and she is committed to further expanding her business in this area. Before we commence, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be taping the event for you to share with your network later, and we encourage you to put any questions that you might have in the chat, and I will definitely be coming back to them later. I'm going to start with some whys. Let's talk about professional services, most particularly what we learned from NAB's 2024, I'm trying to hold it up here, there it is, 2024 Accounting and Financial Planning Report. And if you don't have your copy, please ask your banker. Real estate is coming out soon, Kate, and legal is being worked on. Within this report, which focused on the people profession, our research found from respondents that 77% of accounting firms and 65% of financial planning firms were made up in the equity partner structure, and that there would be an assumption then that a lot of other professional services would be similarly formed. We asked a question about what the biggest challenge affecting our owners' mental health was, and the number one challenge from 69% of those respondents was hiring and retaining and training staff. 41% acknowledged that this was a place they needed help in. Other insights from the report included that 77% expect to grow, and 28% of those businesses were already in an acquisition strategy. And yet, for both industries, so 72% and 74% of respondents, hiring and retaining staff was the #1 way that they were going to grow their business. Our insight in the industry also includes that pathway to equity is a key discussion in staff hiring and retention, and we want to explore today options, opportunities, and barriers in that journey, not only for growth, but for current owners in their transition to retirement and the financial realisation of their equity position. So, Julia, into the questions. The equity conversation must be playing out in the retention and growth strategy of any professional services firm. When should we start such a conversation?
Thanks, Donna. That's a great question, and you're right. It certainly is playing out. And the first thing that I'd say is start the conversation much earlier than you think you need to, and start thinking about it really early. There's actually quite a lot to unpack and a lot to think about in this. Firstly, I'd say remember it's a two-way process. So in terms of thinking about it early, start maybe 3 to 5 years ahead as a business owner. And on the other side of it, don't just assume that people in your team or key members do want equity, because they may not. And I was recently up working for a business up in the Northwest and meeting with some of their team members and asking these questions. And I think it was a bit of a surprise to some of the business owners that people that they thought may want equity in actual fact didn't. So I think that was quite an insight as well, to not make that assumption. But you're right, this is really important in terms of retention and reward for key team members, certainly essential for business growth, but also for future succession planning and thinking about those kinds of things. The other reason I would say that it's important to think about it early is because you really do want to start to build the confidence and skills, importantly, in the team members who you feel might be interested in the future in taking an equity stake. So what are the skills they're going to need in order to be ready for that, to become a future business partner? And things like understanding, the business structure, the balance sheet, and closer to the time, importantly, the cash flow. Is really important that if you're going to take an equity stake in a business, that you're comfortable, if there's any debt funding involved, that the business can sustain that.
That opens a question, doesn't it, about transparency. So where does transparency come into the conversation between the current owners and the potential equity owners?
Yeah, I mean, transparency is essential in my view, particularly as you get closer to the point of offering equity to someone in your business. In the earlier stages, when you're sort of those 3 to 5 years out, I'd probably say that it's more about gauging that interest and just starting that two-way exchange to just see if you think there might be a good outcome for both parties. But in my experience, the best chance of success is where you can forge a win-win scenario. So being transparent around realistic timeframes is important. And also, just not just for the individual, but also for the business, for when the business will be able and ready to offer that equity. Things like, how is a fair value going to be derived for both parties? So getting independent valuations, and Claire might speak to that a bit later, I suspect. I've seen examples where business owners may offer equity when they feel their businesses are at a peak cycle. So that's where the win-win comes into it. So how are they derived? Thinking about maybe staggered entries or, longer timeframes for valuation periods, that kinds of things. And beyond that, I'd say really important to think about the roles and expectations of all of the equity partners. Are you similar, or do you have complementary skill sets, and how might that work? What are the different career stages for the people that are existing equity partners and those coming in? And expectations when you join, are you ready for the added pressure of being a business owner? What are the expectations that might come with having to be really looking and expected to grow the company? Are you a business generator, or are you more of somebody that's more a business servicing personality, and understanding that and being realistic about that?
Thank you. Claire, timing is important, extremely, and possibly early. What are some of the assumptions on timing and funding?
Sure. And firstly, thank you for having me be part of today. It's a great conversation to be having. So I think when we think about assumptions on timing and funding, it's just a whole can of worms. And everything that sort of Julia's just mentioned as well feels like it's conversations that I've had many times over with business owners. And certainly we've had them internally here as well as part of our sort of structuring and bringing people through. One of the big assumptions I think that comes up is that timing is either forever or now. You go from one extreme to the other. And thinking about what position you're coming from as well. So if you're the business owner and you're making an assumption that maybe there's someone in the business who you're going to bring through in the future, it might not necessarily be the right thing to do it 2 months before you're planning on retiring. As Julia mentioned, people have to sort of grow into certain roles sometimes, or there's a lot that people maybe don't know that's involved in that role. Maybe it's a staggered approach and you can do something over a number of years to sort of gradually have that transition happen.
Do you think there's a structural conversation for like the development pathway of the people?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly as Julia said, the earlier you're having that conversation, the better. Because if your end goal is to, let's say get out completely and retire, you want to see that business is taken care of over time, but also that the value is maximized at the end, which I think is going to be most people's goal. And so in doing that, the better sort of systems and support and processes you can put in place to get there, the higher that value is going to be, the more that pie has sort of grown for everyone, which is the best possible result. And often, in conversations that we have with clients along the way as well, there might be someone who, and I'll sort of use an example here of saying, well, I want this key staff member to maybe have a 10% equity share, but the staff member might say, well, I would like to have part of that, but I just really don't want to deal with HR, or there's sort of that assumption there that if it's one in, I'm suddenly responsible for every single facet of the business. And that's just certainly not the case. So those discussions around roles and responsibility and transitioning those over time is important. The timing, the thing I mentioned about timing earlier as well, is that what we often see, particularly with women, I think there is an element of this with, where people are at in their careers. The idea that possibly if now's not the right time, then it's never, I think is something that comes up. And that's just not the case. It could be, well, it's not right for me this year, but maybe it will be in a year or 2 years' time, whatever that is. The earlier that you're having those conversations and the more transparent and sort of honest you are about those things as well, I think the more successful the outcomes are, so that everyone's still working towards that common end goal. And then just to sort of touch on the funding side of things as well, because I think there's a lot of assumptions there. There could be an assumption that person coming into the business needs to be able to fund that purchase entirely. And they might sort of go, oh, well, I'm only, fairly young. I don't have a house with a whole lot of equity. How am I ever going to afford to do this? And if you're not just having a conversation around that, as we well know, certainly NAB and there's opportunities there to have that funded, or to work through different ways of having that work, whether that's sort of a vendor finance type situation or other agreements that you would come to. But the assumption that you need to be able to fund that all up front is often, I think, what scares people a little bit. So talking through the mechanics of how that works can help sort of relieve some of the stresses around that, which is helpful. And also just to start to understand that broader picture, with your banker, with other people in the business as well, about how funding will work, what the expectations are over time, what is the impact to the business as well. If there's goodwill in the business and there's lending that's being provided to one shareholder but not another, what impact is that going to have on the business's ability to maybe go and acquire something else in the future? Or, sort of personal implications as well. So just having the conversations as early as possible, and then whatever you don't know, getting, other advisors involved to help to understand what some of those issues are, they're specialists in those areas for a reason, because they're doing it all the time, and then, you know, can sort of offer that help, I think, and answer most of those questions.
Thank you. Julia, nowadays there's a number of different pathways to equity. What are some of those that you are seeing play out?
Yeah, I think it's actually really important that we start to think creatively about how we can go about this. And it doesn't need to be a one size fits all or the traditional just take that giant leap into equity. As Claire pointed out, people might be at different stages of their life and have different capacity to pick up equity. So I think that sort of staged approach has been discussed. A couple of other things I've seen is we have an example where one of our business partners, it made a whole lot of sense for us to create a subsidiary structure whereby she's the majority owner in that, as she deserves to be as the primary growth engine in that business. And we're really happy to partner with her as a co-owner so that she can tap into the resources and leverage those areas that make sense, be it the investment and research side or the financial management side of the business, the people side, that kind of thing. So that's sort of one option. Another one that we've seen and worked with is actually, rather than thinking about it as being all in, as Claire was saying, actually breaking it up. And for some people, and if it's appropriate for the business, if you're able to do it, you may be able to create a scenario where they really are enjoying or more organic equity growth. So you might watermark the business, for example, and they share in equity in future growth, but may not be necessarily ready for or wanting all those pressures that come with business ownership, with staff management and all the layers that go with being a business owner. So it's kind of just giving them the opportunity to learn and build their skills over time. And, it requires courage, right, to be a business owner at the end of the day. So I think we need to remember that, and we need to just really be patient and be there to sort of support and nurture. And I just think provide those opportunities over time. I just think it's not really realistic for most people to expect to just leap in with both feet in without actually having had a really good plan and transparent conversations. And really an individual approach is what I would say I think's been most effective. So coming back to that, what's going to be a win-win for the business? And if you can nail that, then it's pretty exciting actually, that the doors that can open for people.
It absolutely is. Claire, it's bounced to you? No?
Oh, no, I completely agree with everything there. I'm just nodding along, thinking, yes, this is the same conversations we're having all of the time. Yeah.
Which is great to see. Kate, you're a sole principal of a successful property management firm in an industry that is predominantly owned by male equity partners. What stopped you entering into partnerships to date? And what would you have liked to have seen offered to yourself or your qualified peers?
Look, I've learnt in the past with partnerships, as everyone sort of touched on, it's really important that it's the right fit. In my particular partnership, it was a little bit unbalanced in terms of, the day-to-day business activity and what important that it's just clearly outlined, and that, whether it's partners or equity holders, that everyone knows exactly where everyone stands. So in answer to your question, I guess cash, shares, expectations are all in line, and everyone has a really clear understanding of how the business actually operates as a whole.
Yeah, and we already touched on that a bit, didn't we? So transparency is important, and you've touched on another one, the cultural fit, or the cultural add is also important for anybody taking on an equity partner, which is not surprising, but still something that we have to work through as a business if we want to make ourselves, or our businesses want to make themselves attractive for people to stay within them and to participate and be incentivized in that growth strategy. That's what I'd be looking for from many of our businesses. Do you think that there's, do you think that have you seen any real barriers kind of evident in your industry for equity other than culture?
Oh, look, I just, in terms of, Yeah, well, I think you know, as Julia was touching on, it's, you know, and even with the stats, you know, incentives and workloads and overlapping of, you know, what people's roles are in the business. Our industry in particular really does struggle with staffing and training and retaining, and, you know, keeping that culture, because in my particular industry, it can be a juggling act with the stuff on the day-to-day basis that we deal with. And, you know, I would love to see someone, you know, I as a business owner, you struggle with, you know, keeping the staff, the training, the day-to-day stuff, and the culture. So for me, I would love to have someone. I'm very open to having someone maybe, you know, share that. That is definitely my strength, but I'm also good at retaining, and the growth. So it's a juggling act. You know, Julia mentioned the other day about having a practice manager as an equity share, and it definitely got me thinking. I was like, well, now that's kind of quite appealing.
That's the idea of this whole session. It's really to get everybody thinking about that succession planning. So I'm glad to see it. We've actually influenced one person today, so that's great. That's an outcome.
Yeah, definitely.
As I mentioned previously, it's no coincidence that I planned this discussion around IWD because our professions, including banking, continue to see their workplaces with a 50-50 gender workforce composition. Entry-level staff sits around 60% for women, middle management closer to 50%, but it goes up on a pyramid scheme to the upper quartile of leadership and ownership, sitting at around 30 to 35%. So this is playing out with a median gender pay gap in the finance industry itself of over 25%. Claire, Hoffman Kelly has got a different gender split, right, to other accounting firms on average in its equity structure. How's that come about?
Yeah, we just chased them all the way. No, I'm joking. We didn't really.
Yeah. Do you want to share with everybody kind of what the metrics are?
Sure. Yeah. So we've got 7 equity partners here. 4 of them are female. And that's been the case for a couple of years now. So, I mean, how did it come about? I'd love to say it was this sort of perfect plan, you know, 10 years ago that's slowly fallen into place. But as we all know, what happens in business is that, you know, sort of life and the business evolves. And but what the reason behind it, I guess, fundamentally is that the values have aligned for the people who are here. So all of our equity participants, male and female, all have a common set of values that we talk about, that we discuss, you know, and that we come back to when we're making our decisions about what direction the business is going to go in from time to time. So that has really been the fundamental that underpins everything. If we talk about the particular female directors that are here, not only do our values align, but they are star performers. You know, they have you know, the skills that we want and that we want to sort of flow through culturally within the business as well, so that the relationships that are held with clients and with our referral network as well, the training and the support that's offered to staff and all of that sort of thing. So that each person, so if I just concentrate on the 4 female directors, each of us has had a slightly different journey, obviously, through some starting at Hoffman Kelly as undergrads, as I did. Some have been in other firms and then have come on board at different times during their careers. But some of that equity participation has been in a staged approach as well. So that has been something that we've found works quite well, particularly where you're stepping into, you know, it is a new role, as we've sort of touched on throughout this discussion. To go to 0 to 100 is a lot, but to sort of have that staged approach where there is a change of expectations. I mean, for us, suddenly it's, you know, it's my name on documents, and you sort of have that moment of panic and think, oh, you know, is everything okay? Of course it is. But there is that change of role and expectations. So having a plan to, you know, be able to increase equity at appropriate times has been really helpful for us. The other thing, and I don't want to sound like I'm sort of going on about the importance of documentation and things like that. We all know how important that is. But I think what has helped us a lot as well is that we've had a sense of sort of formal documentation. Well, we do have formal documentation, but there is some formality around our processes every year. We all have an agreed methodology on what valuation is. We sign off on it every 12 months. We do that process. It's a bit of that concept of have the difficult conversation early so that you never need to have it again. If anything were to go wrong, or if someone turned around and said, look, this just doesn't work for my situation anymore, or, you know, whatever the case may be, we're just following the process then. So I think it takes some of that emotion out of it, which is often what we see with clients as well. But once you've just got that in black and white and it's a process to follow, it becomes a lot of, it's just a smoother sort of process, no matter which way that, whether it's entry or exit is going. Obviously very helpful then as well in terms of funding, becomes a logical discussion around insurances and things like that too, which we've had experience with those types of situations. So all of that has just made the process far simpler. The transparency is there, really, really helpful. Yeah.
I would agree with that, Claire, because of my observations, you know, with your business and with, you know, and some of its peers, is that transparency and that framework. It builds a confidence in your partnership, with respect to, you know, what happens next.
Yep.
That is still, you know, unknown for some other customers, you know, and something I've often admired with your business. It's really good.
I think it makes it just far more acceptable. Everyone sort of understands far more that the goal here is to grow the pie for everyone. No one person is giving up something, you know, for someone else. We are just making something bigger and better than what we had before because of everyone's input.
And if we look at it from a feminised workforce or a feminised equity partnership, do you think that there's opportunity being missed in your industry still?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, I hope that probably 5 or 10 years from now, the conversation is going to be a bit different. What's changed over the last few years has been, you know, obviously technology. COVID was actually a wonderful thing for us in a lot of ways, because it meant that everyone understood people can and do work from home very effectively. They can work different hours, which traditionally was just not accepted. You know, you had to be in the office at these times in this place, etc., etc. And I think COVID forced people to rethink that a little bit. The barriers to entry to setting up your own business within the industry, you know, the same way that Kate's done with hers, have changed so much because of technology. So I think where people are trying to have that conversation maybe and saying, I'm part of this business, I'd like to become an equity participant in the future, and you've got a lot of pushback from that, you know, the barriers for someone to turn around and go, well, you know what, I'm just going to go and have a go by myself, are now very low. So people are doing it and they're doing it well. But equally, over time, it might get to a point where you go, well, actually it'd be really nice to be able to take some holidays, or maybe I do need the skills of another person here. Having, you know, more people to bounce ideas off, to be able to increase our technical knowledge and be able to service clients of a different size is also very appealing as well. So I think over time we will see more and more women sort of step into those roles. There's a bit of a legacy there that will probably, you know, work its way out of the industry in the next little while.
It just makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful segue, Claire, into my question for Kate. You know, Kate, you founded equity, right? So you've faced into it, you walked into it for yourself. What do you think, if anything, stands in the way of people like yourself going it alone or forging an equity partnership?
Look, I think it's probably, for me, access to capital, ability to take advantage of the opportunities when they become available. That misalignment of roles and standards and values. For example, I actually had the opportunity last year for an equity partner. I was approached, and my view was, after the first transaction, where do the values lie? Like, where does the partnership, continue from that? It was like a transaction, and there was no more value add after that one transaction. And then I was having to answer to someone, and not sharing the role or the day-to-day business. So I didn't see the value in it, and I turned it down. The money was okay, but it was, it wasn't enough. There was kind of, just no values.
And so for you, what would it take for you to bring on a partner now? Because we talked about, we've all already started talking about, Kate Graham going on a holiday. What's that going to have to what's it going to have to look like for you to bring on an equity partner?
Oh, look, as I said, I think Julia kind of planted the seed. I think finding that, the aligned values, a bit of the capital to give that flexibility for, to be able to grow and take the business to the next level. And just having a clear outline of everyone's expectations, and, who's doing what, whether that's overlapping or, doing the day-to-day and helping with operations, so I can take the business to the next level. So it's definitely, like I said, Julia has definitely planted the seed, because it's definitely a juggling act. I'd love to clone myself, but it's, so I do have my fingers in lots of pies. So it's definitely open to that.
Well, Claire can give you a good framework for it, let me tell you. Julia, financial planning. Are we seeing more women come in at the entry level? And if you were coaching a graduate entrant, what would you do, or what would you say to them about their professional pathway?
Yeah, that's a great question. But if I may say, Kate, so lovely. I love these sessions, how we learn from each other, and how these sort of seeds, how ideas pop out. I think it's fantastic. And I'm, taking my notes as well on this side, with things that both yourself and Claire are saying as well. So financial planning and, and young people and new entrants in general, to be honest, Donna, is our challenge, not just women. Today, still roughly 1 in 5 financial planners are female. And I think that what sometimes gets missed is that people don't really necessarily understand what we do as financial planners, and there can be this misconception that it's all about numbers and technical and the finance side, and it certainly is those things. But I would actually say one of the wonderful strengths, and not to make it gender specific, but having strong emotional intelligence and building relationships and the soft skills that are involved when you're working with families who share, and intergenerational wealth within families where they're sharing often very sensitive information with you, and often with complexity, that does require a skill set around listening and being able to really delve into what's going on for different families. And in my experience, women tend to do that incredibly well. And I'd love to see more women attracted to the profession. I guess our first hurdle, and this is what I'm trying to do on a community level with work with Curtin University, which is the only university in WA that has a financial planning major, is to actually get in front of year 11 and 12 students and start sharing with them and talking about what we do, what does the life in the day of a financial planner look like? Because I would argue that we're probably not on the lips of many year 11 and 12 students out there right now. But as you would all know on this call, we've got a bit of a crisis, and honestly, I think the government's in a spin trying to figure out how to solve this. So we had naturally the fallout that often comes from a royal commission where the pendulum does tend to swing too far. I'm absolutely an advocate for professionalism, for professional qualifications, I actually think it's essential. Given the work we do with families, it would be reckless to not have that. But what it's meant is that we have reached a scenario where the number of financial planners is roughly halved, and the years and the skill set it takes to rebuild that is incredibly difficult. And add to that the legislation and complexity, which has just seen, the cost of advice go through the roof. So the podcast side for me is very much a frustration that I feel that the people that really need the advice and help often can't afford it or can't access it, and that just doesn't feel very Australian to me. So I think that's something we need to work through, and we just have to chip away and try and encourage that. In terms of younger people that are coming in, I would just say what worked for me personally was focusing on skills rather than a job title or a career title. So where do you feel you've got your strengths? That's great, but actually lean into what are the areas that you want to develop or get better at, or try and hopefully work with a business that's happy to support that and build out career mapping for you to give you opportunities to do it, to build your technical skills, but also soft skills along the way. Claire sort of touched on this a little bit as well. I had scenarios where I've mentored young people who may have missed out on equity for somebody who's newer into the practice, for example, and been quite disappointed by that. But when I've turned around and asked the question, if this was a person, would you marry this person? The answer coming back was a definitive, well, actually, no. And there was sort of some issues with their sense of alignment with cultural values in that organisation, and led to that individual going, hang on a minute, maybe I'm in the wrong place. And then thinking a lot more about that. So I think that's important as well. The final thing I'd say is find mentors. And it doesn't need to be within your organisation, but absolutely look for anyone around you that you have exposure to, who you think you could learn from, you could grow from, you can relate to. Reach out to them. What I used to do was reach out to people and just say, can I have 15 minutes of your time? Can I buy you a cup of coffee? If you were in my shoes, what would you be doing now? What made a meaningful difference for you to build your career? So it's probably a very long answer, Donna, sorry, but quite passionate about that.
You brought in so many different topics into that answer, Julia. I think we've got another webinar to explore. So I'm just going to process that. No, it was wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to remind those of us on the call that with the if you would like to use the Q&A to put some questions in, we will revisit those. That John Powell has already put one in from Perth. Thank you, John. But lastly, I'm just going to go around the room and ask the question: if you could change one thing in your industry for retention and or equity pathway, no matter what the gender, what would be the thing that you would change? Claire?
Oh, gee, you're going to put me on the spot there, aren't you?
Yeah. It is a question.
I think
if you had a wish list and a magic wand.
If I could, it would probably be everyone having a conversation in the first 12 months of their career, just to understand, what does this actually look like? What does it mean? You might not be here today, but this is what it can look like. Just open conversations early would be my answer. Yep.
Excellent. Kate, if you could wave your wand on the industry.
Oh, look, I do agree with Claire. I think it's really important that, conversations, the communication, start the conversations early. There's so much potential out there. And, like Julia said, it's, I think, getting into young people and, opening their minds to, there's all these different opportunities. Communication is really,
And there are in the real estate, there's a number of different opportunities for them to stay.
Sky is the limit. You just got to find your niche, and then master it, become good at it, and don't hold back. And Claire and Julia were saying earlier, you got to back yourself, and it takes courage. And I have a thick skin. I'm in the right industry for that thick skin, but it's I have my own challenges with it daily. So it's just back yourself.
Yeah, it does take courage, Kate. Dean Pearson, who's one of our behavioural economists, he shared with me previously that is one of the challenges for women in founding businesses and backing themselves is that confidence factor. It's materially stronger in our male counterparts. And I guess it's incumbent on all of us that are in these different industries to make sure that we're lifting people along that journey. Julia, what's your thoughts if you could change one thing in the industry?
Well, I think that Claire and Kate have nailed it, to be honest. So I might take a slightly different angle if that's okay, because I've been thinking about this, and we do think about the barriers in industry, I guess, or how we can remove barriers. But I also think there's another one here that's important, and that's at more of a household, societal, family level, and more of a cultural thing, I guess. This is going to sound terribly stereotypical, but I was very fortunate that my husband Bernard comes from a Dutch background, and the culture in Holland when you have children is that it's incredibly common for men to take paternity leave. You know, that the mother might take leave for a period of time, then it's almost expected that the father does as well. And then the extension beyond that is that at a household level, it's genuinely co-parenting. It's genuinely sharing chores at home, and the washing and the ironing and the cooking and the gardening and all of those things that come into it. And we never really had an explicit conversation about it, but I was reflecting on it and thinking that that was kind of a major factor for me, that it gave me a lot more time, if you like, and a shared support of both of us kind of working on our careers in partnership together. And it was a very deliberate decision for me to leave the corporate world, which I loved, and they were willing to give me a lot of flexibility, but I inherently knew that it would go to another level for us if I joined my husband in business in partnership, which is what I did 18 years ago when our daughter was 6 months old. And we've never regretted that. And I can honestly say, you know, if you asked our kids, they don't even think about, you know, through school, they're graduated now, but, you know, if it was mum or dad at sport or dropping off or picking up, didn't matter as long as there was one of us there. So I guess that's something I'd like to see change a little bit, and just make that just more accepted, I guess, and encouraged.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. And that response actually links to a question that Courtney Worrell was asking in the chat. But with respect to the work-life balance and the expectations and how that affects our confidence for women coming into the equity pathway, how do you think the businesses can manage that discussion? So where you talk about it having that discussion at home and creating that framework, how do you think businesses can actually create that also, you know, an acceptable framework with respect to transition to work or work-life balance for no matter the gender, their staff? Claire?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think something that, you know, even for us, have we always got it right? Probably not. It's everyone sort of evolves and learns based on their experiences. I think one of the powerful conversations that I've had in a work environment, you know, whether it's internally here or with clients, has been to throw it back the other way a little bit to people and say, you know, if this discussion was about your wife or your husband who was doing this role, how would you want the business to treat them? How would you want this this to be approached, you know? And I guess if we use the example of something like maternity leave, and I use that because our director group has all sort of gone through that in the last couple of years, is saying, well, really, all of us here are expecting to be here for the next 20 odd years, you know. Is 6 months going to make a lot of difference over that time, or is, you know, whatever that time frame is? So let's take a long-term view to that, and I think flipping that around and saying, you know, if you were in my position, what do you think the fair thing to do here is, or how can we approach this where it's going to work for everyone? I did have a little chuckle to myself then when Julia was mentioning that about family before, and not to speak out of school, but we did have a conversation around a table one day where one of the other directors said, oh gosh, I'm a bit late because I had to, you know, drop kids and do this and blah blah blah, and all of the females sort of went, I think you picked the wrong audience here, you know. Because that it is just part of what, you know, so many people are are balancing incredibly well, I've got to say as well. And I think having the confidence to, it's not an excuse. People aren't working around it, so to speak, but having the confidence to, explain that a little bit to the people that you are working with, or your client. If someone's trying to call you at 7 o'clock at night, it's not necessarily the case that you need to be taking those calls, and having some boundaries in place is perfectly reasonable. So I think all of those conversations are helpful, and certainly just having that conversation back the other way, I think means that everyone is starting from a really reasonable, calm sort of place in those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other questions in our Q&A comes from Jacinta, and this one's for you, Kate. And I've got a view on this, so I'm interested in yours. Jacinta is suggesting that when they went into equity partnership in real estate at a young age, mid-20s, but her view is at the moment not sure whether or not the younger generation are as willing to commit. What's your thoughts, Kate? Do you see an interest in equity in ownership in real estate industry?
I think Jacinta's right. It's not, there is hesitations. I feel like my generation, I probably just missed that boat where, I don't know, it's hard to get them to settle. There's a lot of changeover in my industry. They're always being headhunted and stuff like that. They don't stay settled, and they're always looking for that, that next step. I think there is. It just depends. They have to be. I've got a few that are in my business. I think I call them the exceptions. And dedication. Just going back to the mum work-life balance. Like even having a couple of my girls, I had 3 that fell pregnant 6 weeks apart, and each one of them went and had their babies and all came back, and I'm still working with me and stuff like that. I've had one that's had 3 gone and had the baby and come back, and so people like that are the exception, but I guess it's just a matter of whether that's what they want for their family, and having the dedication.
Yeah. Well, I will say to you, Jacinta, we are still seeing a lot of activity in the equity participation in real estate, and there's a range of ages, which I find exciting, because I love to see a young entrepreneur coming into the business. So we are still seeing them, but it'll be interesting. But we're also seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions, so it could be that the numbers are getting smaller. So, and I'm just going to go back up to John's question. How often would you or the business, this one must be for you, Claire, how often would you or the business and equity participants review any agreements? What happens when things don't go to plan?
Yeah, good question. What happens when things don't go to plan? Go and look at your plan, and then you can look at what the next step is. So the classic answer, sorry to cop out here, is it depends how often you need to review them. Having something is far easier to go and edit than having nothing and then wondering what to do next. Each business will be slightly different. So typically we would see stakeholder or shareholder agreements. That is really, for those who may not be familiar, is that agreement on what behaviours, I like to call it, is what all of the shareholders are going to agree to. So that can cover things like, should you to be a shareholder, do you need to be working in the business or not? It can cover methodologies for valuation on entry and exit. That's the part that that element of it probably gets reviewed a little bit more regularly, because the multiples that we see for businesses will change. Or if you've done that original agreement when it was a startup, that valuation side of things is going to be very different 5 or 7 or 10 years later, once it's an established business and maybe the staff count has grown substantially as well. Best practice, I would say, is that everyone at least signs off on something every year. That could seem like overkill to some people, but it could also just be that it's a conversation saying we still agree to that multiple that's in our agreement, and if we actually need to go through the process of calculating what that is, then you would do that. The rest of the valuation, not valuation, I shouldn't say, agreements, the other things that should be checked regularly, and I'm going to say sort of 2 to 3 years, would be around insurances. So if you've got sort of a buy-sell insurance in place, are the values enough? What's changed? Have we got different equity participants? If anything major has changed around funding as well, or if the general business sort of direction has changed as well. If you've moved from a model where maybe all of the income is some sort of subscription based now, or you've got contracts locked in for a number of years, that may be a reason to review some of those agreements. Another example I could think of would be if you did have that shareholder agreement that requires, for example, all participants to be working full-time in the business, but maybe you've got the founder who's phasing into retirement. Everyone might be happy to say, okay, well, actually, some people don't need to be working full-time. They're going to be in a bit of a consulting type role for the last 2 to 3 years. But again, that means that you've got a plan to follow, over that period of time. What happens when it doesn't go to plan? Call your accountant, call your banker, and then they can help you through what the next steps are, I would say. Yeah.
That's beautifully comprehensive. And look, we're getting a lot of hearts from that. It's well done. Thank you so much. Look, we're kind of come to a close now, unless there's any final comments from our panelists. I really want to thank you, the three of you, for taking the time to participate in this conversation today. I know that when I asked you all, you were very forthcoming and thrilled to have you enter into this conversation. And for me, it's so important that we continue on this conversation, not only for succession planning for our businesses, but as we look to use the opportunity of all the talent that's in our businesses and see them both aspire but also reach their potential. From NAB, we want to say thank you to everyone for attending. Note that there will be this recording will be distributed early next week in a thank you email. Any questions that you have about equity funding or anything else with respect to banking, please reach out to your NAB banker. There will be a small survey after the webinar, and we ask that you provide us your feedback, because we will use that for designing future webinars to provide business insights to our customers. And thanks all again for your time and taking the time out to have this discussion today. And we hope to welcome you back to another one soon. Thank you.